Hey. Welcome to episode 90 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. Um, I have another amazing guest today, and we're going to talk about some really challenging, challenging things in a lighthearted way, and that's what I'm all about. When I speak to middle school and high school students and teachers about talking about the challenge because it is real, but doing it in a lighthearted, energized way, cause that helps us create solutions instead of getting bogged down and this is so heavy and there's no way to get out of this. And and also this is something to keep in mind. Pe- People need you right now. People need your example of showing up in your life and being you, and they 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 need to know that it's not only the movie stars and the professional athletes who are doing great things. It's each one of us. So with that, I'm excited to tell you about my guest. First, this will be her intro, and then I'll do a more formal intro. And this is awkward because I'm saying this awkwardly at this moment. So let's just get into it.
Today's guest, Katie McKnight.
Hey, welcome back. Let me tell you about Dr. Katie McKnight. She is a Chicago-based author, speaker, consultant, professor, professor, and passionate literacy advocate. With years of experience in the classroom, Katie now travels the world as an adolescent literacy consultant. She is she is coaching adolescents to want to read. That's amazing. That's amazing. Think of how challenging that is. If you know adolescents or have them as kids or whatever, think of how challenging it is to get them to do anything. And I love this. At the end of the day, Katie is a dedicated and concerned parent. Her lifelong career in education has been consistently inspired and driven by her day-to-day commitment to her own children's education. And oh, by the way, he has written not one, not two, not five, not 10 books, but 20 books. So, which is awesome. So please help me welcome Katie McKnight, Dr. Katie McKnight.
Yay!
Woohoo!
Hi everyone. Nice to be here, Jason. Thank you so much. I just love the positive energy and the message that you bring, and so it's really a privilege to be here. So thank you.
Uh, you're welcome, and thanks for coming on. Who you are and your work is so important, and I'm excited to share some of your story with my viewers, because that's how we inspire each other, by sharing stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I always argue, or I wouldn't say argue, I would always assert that um, everyone is beautifully different. We all have our gifts to share.
Mm,
And
mm.
and then also making sure that people are accepting of the gifts that we bring. And so thanks for being here. Thanks for having me here. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
I'm glad you're here too, because it wouldn't happen without you.
I mean, yeah, I'm glad I came.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you came. I'm glad we both came. So, so let's start when you were a kid. Like when you were 5 and 6, were you like, don't, I'm going I love reading. I'm going to be a literacy expert. I'm going to write lots of books. I'm going to travel the country. Is that the way it was for you from little on?
Well, I think here I need to take my glasses off for this one. I think that um I
Nice
you know
use of prop.
I
Nice.
think, yeah, I think if my teachers then, especially my high school teachers, saw what I was doing now, they'd probably be really shocked by it. And so I just gave a keynote at the Schools to Watch conference about this, and kind of my journey as a writer. And I'm even uncomfortable saying that, being a writer. And so going back to when I was a little like 5, 6 years old. um I never thought I'd be on the trajectory that I am now. I never planned on being a writer. um what I have I'm cross-eyed is the layman's term for it. You can usually see it. I had a lot of eye therapy surgery when I was young. Reading was not the easiest thing for me physically, and I didn't have much of an interest. I've actually written about that, and written about how I was a fake reader pretty much all through elementary school.
What do you mean by the term fake reader?
I was really good at reading the back of book or listening to other people talk about the book, and then I could
I'm laughing because I do that.
yeah, and then for the youngins in your audience, they probably don't know about this, but I was a big user of Cliff Notes, and now it's Spark Notes. So that's basically how I got through high school in particular. And I was not a voracious reader. Now I am. And when I realized that I could read anything that I wanted, that it wasn't just school reading. Last year, I read over 100 books, and I probably read close to 1,000 articles a year now. But when I was young, I may have read one book cover to cover like once a year, maybe. And it was later in life that I did that. Some of it was what was, being cross-eyed and having my eyes, and I would get eye strain very easily, which I still can and I still do. But I really fell in love with reading when I realized that I could read anything that I wanted, and that was open for me. And then writing, I was sharing this when I did the keynote. People look at me and they think, "Oh, Katie McKnight, she's written, over 20 books. She's written all these articles. She's got a fancy PhD at the end of her name. She must have always been good at school." No,
And they talk in exactly that voice too.
yeah, they do in that voice, and they make assumptions, right? And they make assumptions about me. And actually, I was a very average student in high school. I wasn't in any honors AP classes. And now I say I was the queen of the C. And because if I got lower than a C, it would tick off my parents, and I didn't want to do that. And in classes that I was interested in, I excelled and got A's and B's. But I was your classic, like, I just phoned it in. So I'm very committed to those forgotten students, the students that show up all the time. And we pay a lot of attention to that, to the 5% of the kids who might, derail a classroom or behavioral issues. But really, like, what about quote unquote the average kid. So I'm like a poster child of the average kid, and I still have writer's anxiety to this day, and it stems back to my freshman year of high school when I wrote my first 5-paragraph essay. Everybody remembers that, and it was on Of Mice and Men, and I got an F. I can still see that F on my paper. I can still see my teacher's comments on it. Comments like, Katie, you can do better. This is not good work. And even I just published book number 21 and 22, and I'm still uncomfortable. I still have writer's anxiety. And ironically, those 2 books with my colleague, Alan Satomer, are about teaching the fundamentals of writing to middle school students. And I laugh about it because it's so ironic, right? And then in college, when I went to graduate school, when I was working on my master's degree, I had I went to get my master's degree because I was a high school English teacher, which I loved doing and loved being. And my motivation for getting a master's degree was because it was a pay increase, and it was at my master's degree thesis, my oral defense, where 2 of my professors who I had tremendous amount of respect for, Joyce Hiyashima and Beverly Otto, who said, have you ever thought of getting your PhD? I thought it was the most ludicrous, ridiculous idea that anybody had ever told me. It was like somebody saying to me, Katie, I think you should take up downhill skiing. I mean, it was that absurd to me. And they said, the questions that you've been asking in your master's program and the work that you do, you'll get the answers in your doctoral program. Well, clearly they were right. They saw something in me that I didn't see. And that's it, right? When you have people in your life that support you, that build you up, that see your value, you can accomplish great things. And it was these 2 women that put me on the trajectory to where I am today. And but never had planned on it. But I love teenagers. If they're hormonal and pimply, I understand them. Those are my people. I love literacy. I understand the struggle of writing and what that means. And I think that's why I'm an effective writing teacher now. And I love literature. I love the creativity of teaching and working in schools and problem solving. And so that's really it. But people think, oh yeah, she was, here comes the voice again. Oh yeah, Katie McKnight, she did this and she did that, and she was probably in all honors classes. No way. And I also went to college on Pell Grants too. So, but people make assumptions, right? They see something and they make assumptions. And if you take the time to get to know somebody, you find out the gifts that they have, the gifts that they can bring. And that the solution is simple, right? So it's the practice, it's the hard part.
The solution is simple. The practice is the hard part. So let's back up again. One of the things I think we sometimes forget about education is, or maybe we don't forget it, but it can really change a person's trajectory in life. So when you were 7 or 8, if I had known you and asked you, Katie, what are you going to be when you grow up, what would you have said to me?
I would have told you that I would wanted to be a pediatric nurse. That's what I wanted to be, a pediatric nurse. And then I soon realized that I was not suited for the medical field. and I quickly dropped that. And then in college, I had not planned to be a teacher. I really eschewed the idea of being a teacher because my mom was an elementary school teacher for 35 years in the Chicago public schools. I'm like, I can't be what my mom is. There's no way. And it was really like my last year of college that the little voices in the good little voices in our head, not the bad ones, but the good little voices in my head said, maybe you should become a teacher. And I loved literature. I love that. And that's the path I took. But I was actually quite resistant to it because I didn't want to do the same thing that my mom did.
So how did this love of literature develop within you, even though you thought you couldn't read effectively at times?
I love the idea of story, and I did theater in high school. So did my sister. My dad was a huge impact on that. A very creative man who actually wrote some murder mysteries just on his own for fun. And I remember very, very young. This is back in the day when it was radio, right? That my dad had my brother, my older brother, my sister, and I, we created our own, like, what we would consider today a podcast, our own radio show. And he taped it on a cassette tape. But the idea of telling stories had always been so much a part of my upbringing. My sister, who actually is the co-author for the book, I co-authored with her the Second City Guide to Improv in the Classroom. She was the head of writing at the Second City Training Center in Chicago and educational programming. And Mary and I had, you got to remember this is the 70s, okay? And in our 3-bedroom apartment, my sister and I shared a bedroom together, and we had these Sears canopy beds that were on opposite walls in our bedroom. And we would put a blanket over the proscenium, create a proscenium stage. And all of our stuffed animals had their own shows. One kind of rivaled the Carol Burnett show. And we would put shows on across, from our room from each other when we should be sleeping. And we did that, all the time. And, but the idea of story and storytelling was so much a part of my life. And I came from a household full of voracious readers, although I was not one. And so I did a lot of faking because that was the culture in the home. And I didn't, I fake read a lot when I was little, and pretty much until college. But I love stories, and stories are really a reflection, a refraction of our humanity. And we can learn so much from the stories that we tell and the stories that we read and just the history of story, because it essentially goes back to cavemen, inscribing on walls, the woolly mammoth hunt. And so it's just so much of what makes us human. And that's always what has gravitated me towards story, and then literature, of course. And then from there, it just kind of went nuts, right?
So my one of my good friends, Tim, has a question. Who was your favorite teacher growing up, and why?
Oh, I'm putting my glasses on for that, my old lady glasses, so I can read the comments there. Oh gosh, my favorite teacher when I was, what a great question, Tim. I think my role model for who to be as a teacher, believe it or not, was not an English teacher I had. It was my high school physics teacher.
High school physics teacher.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nate Unterman. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school in Chicago. I went to public elementary, and then I went to an all-girls high school. And I had him for physics, and I fell in love with science. I'd always been interested in science. I thought it was fascinating. I still am. I love reading like weird science and things like that. And but he was pivotal because he was a lot like these two college professors that I had in middle school. He saw something in me that I did not see. And I had him for regular physics, and he encouraged me to write a proposal for an experiment for the space shuttle. And it's a high school contest, and I'm like, oh, why would I want to do that? And so I did it, and again, he saw something in me that I didn't, and it actually was in the final round, to be considered to go up on
Oh
the
my
space.
gosh.
I didn't get like recognition for that. It was just he found out that I was in that last group before they picked the finalists, and found out that information, which I don't know if he was supposed to find out, but he found out, and
Wow.
it really just raised up my self-esteem in a way that I never thought that I would. But he saw something in me that I didn't, and he said, hey, have you thought about doing? And I was like, oh, why would I do that? And he's like, well, aren't you interested? And started asking me some questions, and I kind of scratched my head. I'm like, okay, I'll do this. And I say this all the time. If the internet was around when I was in school, I probably would have flunked out, because even though I was like queen of the sea and a very average student, I had a lot of curiosity about things. So I was the kid that would hang out in the library and look up all kinds of things back in the day before laptops and Google, and
Mm.
actually pull books off the shelf. I'm supposed to look up one thing, but then I'd wind up getting distracted and looking up all different kinds of things that I would run into and got fascinated with. So, it was really he that just changed a lot of my thinking. I mean, also in that point too, in my senior year of high school, I was seriously thinking of not going to college too. And just, going and getting in the workforce and working full time.
Oh, you mean when your physics teacher. So talk about trajectory. Working full time, that's a good life, but you've chosen a way different life, and your physics teacher kind of catalyzed you on this path.
Yeah, very much so. And he showed me what was possible in ways that I didn't think of before. And that was huge. I honestly didn't think that I was going to be smart enough to be successful in college. And 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 it's all, here's the thing, it's the power of one, right? How one person can make a tremendous impact on another person or a lot of other people. So it can be either negative or positive. So when I got that F on that paper, I lost confidence as a writer, as a thinker, as a quote unquote good student. I really lost confidence because I didn't understand why I got it. And I really felt it as a judgment about my intellect and what I was capable of doing, as opposed to sitting me down and saying, okay, here's what's strong in your paper, what's working. This is what you need to work on in order to improve that. Like, tell me what actually is. And that's important in classrooms and with students, is modeling what the gold standard is, and then being explicit and making sure that students understand what they need to do to march up that ladder to get to the gold standard. Because I know that all of us are quite capable of getting to the gold standard. Some of us go like this, some of us go like that, and some of us just go like that. So there's multiple ways. There's more than one way to get to the roof. And that's what my high school physics teacher taught me, and what I learned about. They had faith in me in a way that I didn't. That I lost a lot of confidence. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm a good teacher too, a good educator, is that I've had that experience, and training teachers and working with schools to get student achievement up.
As a writing teacher, were you always, no matter how missing the mark a student is on the assignment, will you always find something to on about that, right?
Yeah, so that's the gold standard that I want to live up to for a lot of reasons. Is that we know from neuroscience, now we know from neuroscience that when you kind of like prime the brain for to work on something, or what we might commonly refer to as criticism or whatever, it fires the part of your brain that is the fight or flee, and we get defensive. But if I say to somebody, here's what's working, here's what's really strong, and to make it even better, if you do blank, blank, and blank, it's going to get you further. That's the gold standard to go to. The problem, or I shouldn't say the problem, the challenge to that is that when you have 147 students, to give that kind of individualized attention is more than challenging. It's very difficult. So one of the things that I've worked on, and we know from the research too, that we call that just, student descriptive feedback, that when we do that and we have teacher clarity, student achievement just goes boom, it just goes up. And so the challenge is, how do you create that in classrooms in a systemic way that is not overwhelming for teachers and students are getting what they need? That's the challenge, right? We know what the ideal is, but given the logistics, how do we make that happen? And so I've been developing now for about 10 years, and I'm a big believer in using collaborative small groupings, and I call them literacy and learning centers. So we always start with a mini lesson. So it's direct instruction. So I show you what the gold standard is. We're working on this because we want to get to here, and this is what it looks like. And I model it for students in a think aloud or read aloud like that. And then you practice. And sometimes you might do exactly what I did. And you know what? That is awesome, because the students actually heard me and they listen to me, and they're doing exactly the same thing. And then with the centers and the collaborative groups, kids are working in small groups on various skills, activities, things like that. Centers are not new for elementary, but the concept of it in doing it in older students in middle school, high school, even my doctoral candidates, when I taught at the university, I did that. And what it does, and then there's a teacher-led center. So at my teacher-led center, I can bring Jason, I can bring your buddy Tim, who's writing all the comments in the chat. And, we get together and I say, okay, so we're together as a team right now because we want to work on introductions right now for your papers. Hey, Jason, your introduction, can you read it? Because I'd love for people to hear how you put your claim in your introduction. Boom, we do it. Okay, what do we like about Jason's introduction? And it's never like, oh, what's wrong with it? It's always positive. It's always generative. Yes, he has this. Now look at yours. What do you see? And then we do that, and I'm able to work with students in smaller groups. We put students who need to work on similar skills together or have similar questions, and then I can give them that attention. And what's interesting is that my research keeps showing me over and over and over again is the students love it because they say it's easier for them to attend to task. The work is more complex, but it's easier because they can talk about it, not just with their teacher, but with each other. And the research is very clear and definitive on that as well. And then what teachers say, and then they say class time goes faster. And teachers say the same thing. They say things like, I never knew my students could do this. I didn't think that they could work so well independently. Class time went faster. And when you lose track of time, like when class time goes faster, that Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who's a Hungarian psychologist, talked about flow theory. And when you're deeply invested, deeply engaged in something, you lose track of time. That's why you can be in an amusement park all day and you look at your watch and say, oh my gosh, it's 4 o'clock already. And it feels like it's maybe 11 a.m. And so that's flow. So when we set things up like that, achievement goes up, teacher performance goes up, everything seems to click. So then the $5 million question is, why don't we just do that? And here's my 2 cents on it, is that habits are hard to change.
Mm.
Solutions are simple. It's the implementation and sustainability that's the hard part, because we're changing habits. So all of us have been in school. Most of us have been in school where we sat in rows, or maybe like fake rows, and it was very teacher directed, and that's what was traditionally done. And we learned, especially teachers, we learned that way. I was successful that way. But what could it have been if you did it
Mm.
this way? And so that's always the challenge, is breaking habits are hard, very, very hard to do. There's a wonderful book called The Power of Habit, that I highly recommend, that really gets in. That's why weight loss is so hard, because you've got to actually change your habits, and that's the hard part.
So a question on centers, like how do you encourage the students in the non-teacher center to attend to task instead of just talking about whatever, goofing off or
For things to turn into chaos in the seventh grade classroom. It's really funny, because they've been doing it when they were younger, in elementary, early childhood. So like pre-K through like third grade, they've been doing it. So when we start constructing it again that way, then they kind of gravitate. It's like, oh yeah, I used to do this all the time. That's one thing. The second is building habits. So making it very clear, like, these are our norms. These are the expectations. Like, some of the ones that I always have is read 3, then ask me. You can't Dr. McKnight me until you've read the directions at least 3 times. Um, you can't say my name. And second, like Rumpelstiltskin, if you say my name, I'll disappear. And then the second is we work as an ensemble. We're a team. So it's my job to make you, Jason, look good. And so we work together as a team, as an ensemble. A third one I have is, and it's just like between 3 to 5, because if you do too many, then your brain turns off. And notice I'm saying norms, not rules, because as soon as I say, okay, these are the 5 rules, what's the first thought, Jason, that goes in your head? These are the rules.
I almost the first thought is I want to break them.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are no different than the rest of us. If somebody says, don't chew gum and glass, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna chew gum because I want to see if I can get away with that. And so that's our natural kind of brain, neurological response. So those are posted. So let's say I'm in a classroom and I've got this group off task, this group off task. They're top, blah, 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 blah. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Eyes on me. Okay, I'm stopping everybody right now because I want to remind you of what the norms are. The norms are boom, 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 boom. Right now, I hear individual voices and it's getting too loud. So remember, norm 3 is if I can hear individual voices or any of us, we're getting too loud. So let's get control of our voices and remember what norm 3 is. Great job. Go. 5 minutes later. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, eyes on me. And then you always have the kid where I say, okay, why am I stopping everybody right now? And the kid in the back says, because we're too loud, and screams it across the room. Exactly. And let's remember what norm 3 is. It gets to the point where you don't even have to say anything. You can just like look up from your teacher-led center, and the kid's like, oh. And what it is we're reestablishing habits and norms that are expected in that classroom. So when students are not meeting those norms and they're not engaging in desirable behaviors, stop them. Remind them what the norms are instead of practicing undesirable habits. And that's how you build habits, is that constant reinforcement, reminder, like the keystone, and doing that. So this model came out of a classroom need in a school district that I was working in over 10 years ago in Western Maryland. And I keep building it and building it and building it. And I have 2 books that are on developing the centers for older students. And student performance skyrockets. And then the other thing too is I've done it in very kind of privileged settings, and I've also implemented in school districts. One school that I was in was labeled by the state as an F school. I always love it when letter grade. It reminds me of that F paper I got as a ninth grader. And in 2 years, they went from an F school to a B school. And their sister school in that district went from a D school to a B school. And so, and what happened is that kids were more engaged in the work, in learning. They were more actively involved. And the research is very clear that when learners talk about their learning, it increases student performance and their internalization of the skills, the content knowledge, what they're learning. And so, as I say, the solutions are simple. It's the implementation and sustainability that's the hard part. That's always the hard part.
So centers are great for students in terms of retention and in terms of learning how to work on teams, which will be a lot of the work, a lot of what they have to do at work. So how do centers affect teacher workload then?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm oftentimes asked that question too. So whenever you're implementing something new, I'm not going to lie and say to you like, "Oh, it's going to be the greatest thing." You're learning something new, so it's going to take you more time to learn it, without a doubt. But what happens is, because I have students in my teacher-led center and I'm evaluating student work like on the spot and giving kids feedback, I shouldn't take another paper home to grade ever again. So you're going to have your weekends back, baby. It's coming back. And so the prep might take longer too. So it's going to shift. You're going to do more in the prep probably than you would with the paper grading. But what teachers tell me constantly, they say that's absolutely true. But what happens after about 4 or 5 months into it, they see it they see it going down. And high school teachers like it because they discovered that they can cover more content than they've been able to in the past. And it's because the students are so on task and working, in these small groups. So to answer that, yeah, it is going to, you're going to do more in the prep, but it'll go down on your paper load. And eventually you're not going to be taking what you're taking home now beyond, contract hours or school hours at home. And the other thing too is that if you go to my website, which is engaginglearners.com, not only can you sign up for my newsletter, I know you're on my newsletter, Jason, but I also have a free resource of the week. So they can be mini lessons or activities that you can do in your centers, and they're geared towards 4th through 12th grade. And that's my gift to my community of educators. And so really like high quality vetted material. And then also in my books on literacy and learning centers for the big kids, there's 2 of them. You can go there and there's all kinds of ready to use activities, mini lessons, lots and lots and lots and lots of examples to get you started, because it's going to take a while to get into that rhythm because it's something new. But a lot of teachers have amazing materials as it is. So I always charge them with the question of, all of us have that packet drawer in our kitchen or on our hard drive. You need to open that up because you have a lot of brilliance there. And how can you repackage it so you can get it into these little chunks where you can do it as a mini lesson, that you can do it for guided practice in centers. I always say that teaching has to be chunky for students to learn. So we don't learn well when it's a lecture from beginning to end. That's not, Katie is not saying never lecture again. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that your brain turns off. And it's not because of technology. We always have. We've just been really good about hiding it. And
Hmm.
can only attend to task for a certain amount of time before it shifts. So that's why students always tell me when they're working in centers, they have a much easier time paying attention and focusing. And the movement, middle schoolers actually have to move more than kindergartners to learn. And that's,
What? Okay,
isn't that mind
okay,
blowing? Yeah,
okay,
it's
okay.
mind blowing.
Middle schoolers actually have to move more than kindergarteners to learn.
Yeah. Doesn't that like blow your brains out? Yeah.
Yeah, but school has been structured as exactly the opposite.
Yep.
Kindergarteners move and seventh graders are supposed to sit still. So you're saying that's not helpful?
The science is very clear on it. The neuroscience, we have some fantastic neuroscience that's come out about learning and the adolescent brain in particular in the last 5 years. A wonderful TED talk that I highly recommend, whether you're a teacher of teenagers or a parent, is Sarah Jane Blakemore. She's a scientist out of neuroscientist out of Oxford, and she has a wonderful book too titled "Reinventing Ourselves." And her TED talk is the same thing, same title: "Reinventing Ourselves: Unlocking the Inner Workings of the Teenage Brain." And your brain at the onset of puberty, which I always say, can happen anywhere between the ages of 5 and 55, because it's all over the place, right? And so as soon as we enter puberty, your prefrontal cortex, which is your center for reasoning, abstract thinking, it's one of our emotion centers, goes through a massive change. And so what we don't use gets pruned away, kind of withers and dies. The things that we do use get strengthened, like tree branches, like just how you have to prune a tree, and they make stronger connections. It is what happens with the onset of puberty in teenagers with brain development is as dramatic as 0 to 12 months. So we've always known that
What?
teenagers lose their minds, but now we have the biological evidence and the neuroscience to prove that it is true, that they do.
Wow.
They just change completely. Yeah.
So, you set me up perfectly for the next question. So, how is teaching centers are vital, but how is improv also? How can it also just be this amazing teaching tool?
Again, it incorporates so much of what we know now about teaching and learning and how our kids learn best. So that on the spot student, so I said, well, let me rewind.
How would you characterize improv first? Like what is improv, and then how does
Oh,
it
with
work in
improv.
the?
Well, improvisation, switching gears on that, the work that I did on the book, for Second City, improvisation in the classroom, the Second City Guide to Improvisation in the Classroom, and also did a research study on it years ago. And I get really nerded up on it because what we use in improv, and I'll explain the history and what improv actually is. I get nerded up on it because the skill set that we use for reading and writing, you use in improv, but it's purely kinesthetic. So I especially get excited because all kids, like kids on the spectrum or kids who may have a reading disability or communication disability, may and neurodiverse populations, there's access points to developing that skill set. And my son, my almost 21-year-old son, has autism, and what we found in the research is that kids on the spectrum did really well in improv activities, And I think a lot of it has to do, my hypothesis is that it has to do with the fact that all the social norms are spelled out in 3 simple rules, in 3 simple guidelines. So here it is. Here's the story on improv and how it relates to education and learning. Viola Spolin is the foundational artist of improvisation. And she is a Chicago girl, was a Chicago girl, just like me. And she got her start in the settlement houses in Chicago. And she was working with immigrant children. And she soon realized that with this cacophony of languages being spoken, that the kids were having challenges communicating with each other. So she created these drama games, which she called improv games. And in the improv world, they call them games. I call them exercises in education, because as soon as you say games in education, nobody thinks there's any oomph to it, you know? So she created these improvisation games. Every improv game has a point of focus, a problem that needs to be solved. And she argued that it's from there that creativity blossoms, and communication and learning and understanding each other. And there's 3 principles of improv. So if you're an improviser and you take classes, this is your first lesson. And the first is the concept of yes and. Whatever you bring, Jason, as an ensemble member with you, remember, it's my job to make you look good. I'm going to take whatever you give me and I'm going to build on it. And then the idea of give and take is I'm not going to hog the focus or hog the idea. I'm going to make sure that we have a give and take, that I'm supporting you and fully participating. And of course, I love it when we think about inclusion and diversity and classroom community and social emotional learning. And then the third is the idea of ensemble, and that we work as a team, we work together. It is my, as an ensemble member, I am going to take care of you. So I'm going to do a simple kind of improv exercise with you right now. Okay. So I want you, Jason, to imagine that you have an apple in your hand, and through the screen, through the magic of technology, just
I actually have an Apple computer in my hand.
Yeah. What's that?
I actually have an Apple computer in my hand.
There you go. So just say to me, hey, Katie, here's an apple, and share it with me.
Hey, Katie, here's an apple.
Oh, this is a really awesome apple, Jason. You know, I was just thinking, I'm gonna slice it up. Do you want a piece?
I would love a piece.
See, you got it already. You know the principle of yes and now we're giving and taking. Okay, here you go. Oh wait, there. Let me put it this way. Here, you got it. There you go. Take that piece of apple. I've got some caramel sauce and some chocolate sauce. Are you interested in either of those? Would you like some of that?
Oh, I like mixing things up, so I would like a little both.
Oh, you want a little both? Okay, here you go. Here, take some. There you go. Put some on there. Oh, this is like delicious. You know, it's like
it
one of the
so
best
good.
apples I think I've ever taken in my entire life. You know, it reminds me of a story when I went apple picking with my daughter and my nephew. And it was like one of the most awesome days in Wisconsin I ever had. And it was like the craziest thing, because we were like picking apples, and we saw like a gnome behind one of these apples. And then, you know, you can see where we can just keep building and building, as opposed to you saying, hey, Katie, here's an apple. And I say, no, it's not an apple. It's a baseball. And it's like, wah, 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 wah. There's nowhere to go. And so the idea is you embrace that. So when we think about 21st century learning, working as teams, so not just the improv, but also working in centers and working in that kind of collaboration, this gets kids ready for what's expected for 21st century learning, working on teams, problem solving, critical thinking, using literacy skills to solve problems. And this is what STEM is about. This is, you know, everything. And then I would argue that it's really the foundation of a democracy, right? So if we can freely exchange ideas and suggestions and welcome them with respect from one another, what an amazing force that we are to contend with, you know. And also there's also the pragmatic part of it too, Jason, is that now that I'm in my, mid to late 50s, I know who's coming behind me and I want to make sure they can take care of me. So when I get older.
Yay.
So that's the very pragmatic, maybe humorous way of looking at it too. But yeah, and that's the thing that I love about improv too, is that we all have amazing gifts, right? And it just embraces that inclusion. And there's never a bad idea. There's never a wrong answer. There's no mistakes in improv.
So what would you do with the 14-year-old guy who says Dr. Katie, I want to be a mechanic. I do computer games all day. I watch YouTube videos. I mean, I really don't need to eat. I have technology I don't need to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, would you like try to reason with that young person, or would you take another tack?
Well, I have a 9, almost 10-year-old grandson who's a total gamer and loves gaming. And gaming is not a bad thing at all. It's an industry that's larger than the entertainment movie industry, and there's lots of pathways. There's lots of pathways that are within gaming that you could do. You could be an engineer, you could be a marketer, you could be a story developer. There's the business aspect, as far as marketing and sales and all that. There's all of these career pathways that are there that may start with, like my grandson playing games. And how can you take your knowledge of games and your passion of games and technology and turn it into something that could be even bigger or better, that you could share with many people and make it your career even? So it's not dissimilar for me of, I love storytelling. I love stories. I love learning about people. That's something else that's very much a part of me. I love learning about other people and other cultures. I have an insatiable curiosity about that.
Mm.
And so I'm in a career that embraces that and allows me to explore that even further. So imagine if you could do that. And this is why esports has become so popular in middle school and high school and colleges, where kids are competing competitively in these games. So instead of, believe me, we talked to my grandson about his screen time, believe me, and we'll limit that as grandparents when he's hanging out with us. But because there's other things in life. And that's what we do as adults, with the youngins around us, is constantly exposing them to other things. But we also have a tremendous amount to learn from them, in their knowledge and their experiences. So, in my generation, it was TV. We were watching too much TV and hanging on the phone. And that was in the day when the phone was in the kitchen, on the wall. And so it's always something, right? But how do you use that interest and for it to become a pathway to something even greater?
In learning to read and read well is part of that pathway to something greater.
Yeah, I mean, here's the interesting thing, is that writing, actually, it's not just to be able to write and to communicate my ideas to a larger audience. It's also part of developing critical thinking and really hardwiring your brain for much larger thinking, complicated thinking, abstract thinking, which is quite necessary in the 21st, always has been necessary, also in the 21st century, because we have highly complex problems or challenges that we need to solve. And that when you actually write, and the research is very interesting on this too, that when you write pen to paper as opposed to fingers to keyboard, you actually process more and retain more than when you write by hand than when you actually put fingers to a keyboard, which is, I find, very, in a very nerd way, fascinating. And and then with reading, same thing. Like the more you read, the more you basically prime your brain for complex thinking. And that's fascinating too. So when I went back to, the adolescent brain, how much it changes, uh, uh, it is the inputs that can really change your brain. I'm sure, many people know about the trauma brain and, what happens to brain development in children and adults when they're in traumatic events or stress events.
Mm.
It's the same thing in the other sense too. So why having centers and being positive in my feedback to students and making sure that students understand how they can grow, I'm literally developing brains. Whereas if I'm yelling at students, threatening students, things like that, it fires the part of the brain that will induce a trauma response, and that's not good for anybody. So reading and writing actually increases brain capacity, and so that's why it's so important, why it's so critical. And the research is also very clear too. How do you get kids engaged and motivated to read? Asking you, Jason, oh, what was the main idea of the story? And can you identify 3 qualities of the character? And I give you a multiple choice test on it, as opposed to a big question like, what are the limits of friendship? And I give you of Mice and Men, we read of Mice and Men, Secret Life of Bees, and The Outsiders. But that's the question that that's the question we need to answer. What are the limits of friendship? Does friendship have limits? Are there boundaries in friendships? Why? Why not? Those are the questions that are much more interesting to get into, rather than what was Jay Gatsby's neighbor's dog's name. Nobody really cares about that. It's those big ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, who cares? How many of us have taken that quiz, right? When we were in school. But the tools that I need to understand the story, like finding the main idea, the characters, that will all come into play when you ask a big question.
The better the question, the more engaged people will be.
Yeah. And then choice is huge. So if I have a question of like, what are the limits of friendship? And you can choose either this, this, or this, then kids are more motivated to read. It works the same way in any kind of course. So in a science class I was in, we were studying fungus, right? And how fungus functions in an ecosystem. And I said to the students, I said, okay, you can read an article about mushrooms, toe fungus, or zombie fungus. Pick which one you want. We're still looking at fungus. We're still looking how it functions in an ecosystem, but we each have a different viewpoint or pathway that we selected to understand the content. And same social studies class, we're studying the rainforest. Okay, so the challenges of the rainforest and the argument for preservation. You guys can be the rubber plantation harvesters. These are the environmentalists. Here are some ranchers. Here's the viewpoint of indigenous folks who live in indigenous populations who live in the rainforest. Okay, this section of the text, pick, this is what you're assigned to read, and you need to discuss how do the challenges of preserving the rainforest impact the whole world population, but you're going to look at it through the lens that you chose. And this isn't new. Katie's not making this up. I'm ripping off John Dewey from 100 years ago. And he's right. And then it's backed up now with neuroscience and what we know about teaching and learning and how kids learn best in schools. But our schools don't resemble it for the most part right now. And they
So is it fair to say you don't give assignments per se, you give choices?
Yeah, you know what? I got to tell you, here's the deep dark secret is that when I was a baby teacher in the late 80s, when I was a brand new teacher, I just poo-pooed that. I was like, oh no, everybody needs to read Beowulf. Everybody needs to read this. And I really took that stance because that's how I was taught. But as I taught more and more, and what I've learned in my 34-year career and walking into classrooms and teaming with schools and teachers and principals, is that the more we do that, the greater the success. So I have to look at the hard data and the results, and the hard data and the results indicate over and over and over again that when we do these things, that's what actually raises student achievement. And John Hattie has done really an infamous meta-analysis that represents over 250 million students in over
What?
1,000 studies. Yeah, in over 1,000 studies, and he identified 250 factors that have the greatest impact on student learning. Number one and number two. Number one is collective teacher efficacy, the belief that I and you can positively impact a student's learning, that we have the capacity to teach our kids, that we can do it, and that the students have the capacity to learn. That belief, that understanding can raise students by 2 years in 1 year. So notice I'm not saying a program. I'm not even saying it's my model of literacy and learning centers. It is the belief in your students, just like the belief Mr. Unterman gave me, my high school physics teacher, and my 2 professors when I was working on my master's degree. And this is recent, like in the last 5 years, this research, this meta-analysis. Number 2, teacher clarity is number 2. And there's quite a big distance between collective teacher efficacy and teacher clarity. But when teachers are clear about their expectations and what the gold standard is, students are going to perform higher. Those are the 2 highest. And then from there, it just falls off. It just falls off. So notice it's not a program. It's not a textbook you buy. It's not a computer you use. It's people. It's always the people. And I always say that teachers, educators are not the problem. They're the solution. And it's always people that can change everything as far as I'm concerned.
Wow. So profound. My mind's expanding as we talk. One last question, which I ask all my guests. So in my work, I talk about doing our imperfect best, and what it means to me is that we each develop a vision of the best we want for our lives, and that we want to create in the world. Then when mistakes, frustrations, so on and so forth come up, instead of using them to say, "Oh, I quit. It was just an illusion, just a dream," we learn from all that stuff and move forward. What does doing your imperfect best mean to you, Dr. Katie McKnight?
Well, I would say I'm horribly flawed like everyone else is. And actually, here's the neuroscience of it. And as an educator, you actually learn from mistakes. You actually don't learn from being right all the time. So in school, mistakes should be embraced as learning opportunities, as opportunities to grow and expand. And so if you think about, if you've ever studied a foreign language, you don't learn by getting it right all the time. You learn by fumbling your way through and developing it. So how am I imperfect? I think I always say I'm horribly flawed in so many ways, and I'm awesomely awkward in the sense, to coin your term, in the sense of like my trajectory to where I am right now is like this, and sometimes, but I got here. And that's what's important is, and as you said, goal setting is what is it that you embrace. And I wish I had learned that lesson in my 20s as opposed to my 50s. And So I know I accept the fact that I am inherently flawed, and so I need to keep learning, and that's really the thing that drives me. Um, my husband of 5 years always, when we first started dating 7 years ago, he says to me, he's like, "You ask a lot of questions," and and that's the teacher, the educator in me, because what a delight it is to learn from you, Jason, to learn from other people, to learn about different cultures. It makes us
Mm.
all the richer. And the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. So that's probably my flaw is I don't know anything. There's a lot
Mm.
I still need to learn. So
But it makes life so exciting because you get to constantly learn and explore new things, huh?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's just such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for, instead of seeing education and teaching as this insurmountable problem and throwing up your hands and saying, nothing to do, coming up with solutions that actually are challenging but can be applied and make a huge difference. I encourage everyone to check out engaginglearners.com. You'll get more of Katie's amazing energy there, and so many practical, amazing things. So thank you, Dr. Katie McKnight.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for doing this. It's such an awesome podcast, and all that you share and positive energy that you keep sending out in the world.
Uh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to do what I do. Oh my gosh. Oh, like Katie is talking about how our minds expand from reading and writing. I tell you, my mind also expands from doing the show. Every guest, including Katie, so much many new ideas and new approaches, and it really emphasizes to me that even though we might feel stuck at many points in life, there's actually so many solutions and new approaches around us if we just open ourselves up to having conversations and trying our imperfect best to do new things. So I urge you, as I do every week, talk to the people around you, ask them new questions, be curious, because they have so much to share and you have so much to share too. So with that, I leave you until next week when my guest Coach Jim and J Mac. They have a phenomenal story. J Mac kept kept he was a captain of the basketball coach Jim basketball team for year after years, and and he, by the way, experienced autism, and he kept saying, "Put me in, coach." And finally, one game, senior year, coach called J Mac, and then he like scored 20 points in five minutes. It's a phenomenal story. You'll have to tune in next week. Thanks for your time being here this week. Until next week, have an amazing day. Amazing Wednesday.